And if you remember our plot, we were, bring us up on our screen somehow. We're at Solomon's palace. Remember, they had started up in Issachar, where by chance some of the people had met this shepherd girl, brought her to Solomon. He's infatuated with her, makes overtures to her there, and then brings her to Jerusalem. And they're in the palace, and he has made one overture to her in the palace, and then in his absence, the ladies of the court have asked us, tell us about this. She's talking about the young man that she's in love with, the shepherd boy, and they say, tell us about him. And she tells in glowing details about this striking young man that has her heart. But it's Solomon who is still saying, but I need you to be my bride. Pick up the reading in chapter 6, and to put it in context, this is another of the love overtures that Solomon makes to her, starting in verse 4. Thou art fair, my love, as Tirzah, comely as Jerusalem, terrible as an army with banners. Turn away thine eyes from me, for they've overcome me. Thy hair is like a flock of goats. And he's back into the same thing that he said to her 2 or 3 times already. Thy hair is like a flock of goats that lie alongside Gilead. Thy teeth are like a flock of ewes, which have come up from the washing, whereof everyone hath twin, and none is bereaved among them. Thy temples are like a piece of pomegranate behind thy veil. There are 80 queens, wives, and 80 concubines. So 60 wives, 80 concubines at this stage in the game, and virgins without number, young women available for me without number. Verse 9, my dove, my undefiled. Here's another tribute to her purity. My dove, my undefiled, is but one. She is the only one of her mother. She is the choice one of her that bare her. The daughters saw her and called her blessed. Yea, the queens and the concubines, and they praised her. My wives and the concubines, everybody praises you. So he says, who is she that looketh forth as the morning, fair as the moon, clear as the sun, terrible as an army with banners? This is his overture to her, bragging on her beauty and telling her everybody is impressed with you. Then she interrupts in verse 11. And here's where we got some of the setting for the story that I told you before we got into the story. She said, I went down to the Garden of Nuts. When I'm at the college teaching, I tell them I assume they came to Florida College. I went down to the Garden of Nuts to see the green plants of the valley, to see whether the vine budded and the pomegranates were in flower. She was working. She was on her way checking on the fruit trees. Verse 12, and before I was aware, my soul set me among the chariots of my princely people. Before I knew it, I was in this crowd of you people, the princely people. And the princely people say to her, return, return, O Shulamite, return, return, that we may look upon thee. Evidently, when she saw this crowd of the royal people, she was going to run away. And they called to her and said, wait, come back, come back. And she says in verse 13, why would you look upon the Shulamite? And they answer and say, as upon the dance of my Haniam. That's the same figure as when Jacob saw the angels ascending and descending on the ladder, and they say, you're like a beautiful dance out here. You're like a beautiful picture. So this tells us a little about her background and how she got in connection with Solomon. And I'd given you that as a prelude. Chapter 7 begins again Solomon's tribute to her. And prepare yourself. Solomon's talking to her. How beautiful are thy feet in sandals, O prince's daughter. Thy rounded thighs are like jewels, the work of the hands of a skillful workman. Thy body is like a round goblet, wherein no mingled wine is wanting. Thy waist is like a heap of wheat set about with lilies. Thy two breasts are like two fawns that are twins of a roe. Thy neck is like the tower of ivory. Thine eyes are as pools of Heshbon by the gate of Bath-rammon. Thy nose is like the tower of Lebanon, which looketh forth to Damascus. Thy head upon thee is like Carmel, the mountain, and the hair of thy head like purple. Maybe the ladies of the court speak up and say, the king is held captive in the tresses thereof. Stop just a minute and look at what he has said about her. This time when he starts talking about her, he's focusing on her physical beauty. Thy feet are beautiful in sandals. Thy rounded thighs like jewels. Thy body is like a round goblet. Thy waist is like a heap of wheat. Wheat, when it was shocked and stood in the fields and they tied it around the middle of it. Or a goblet would be like the woman's body with the breast and the narrower waist and the swell of the hips. So he's describing this beautiful woman and how he is taken by her physical beauty. And the ladies of the court say, the king has been swallowed up by this girl. Pick up the king again in verse 6. How fair, how pleasant art thou, O love, for delights. This thy stature is like a palm tree, and thy breast to its clusters, to the clusters of the palm tree. And I said, I'll climb up in the palm tree, and I'll take hold of the branches thereof. Let thy breasts be as clusters of the vine, and the smell of thy breath like apples, and thy mouth like the best wine. You know what Solomon has just done? He's just tipped his hand and let her know that the thing that has really got me caught up about you is you're just a beautiful woman with a lovely body. And I've decided I'm going to possess it. What was the figure? He described all of her beauty and then said, you're like a palm tree with the clusters thereof. I'm going to climb up in that tree and possess it. In my Bible, in the midst of verse 9, there's a big space. Perhaps some of yours have the same thing. There's a space in the original manuscripts. And right here, the girl has made her decision. Solomon has been giving her this big story that, oh, I need you, honey. Oh, I've got all these other women, but there's nobody like you. I've got to have you because you're just so special. You're the only one of your mother. If there were others, I could go and get one of your sisters. And now he lets it out that what he really is driven by is her physical beauty, and that he plans to possess her. With that, he had concluded his statement by saying, thy breath is like apples, and thy mouth is like the best wine. And she interrupts him. He introduced wine. And she says to him, that goeth down smoothly for my beloved, gliding through the lips of those that are asleep. She said, Solomon, you've described me, but I'm not for you. I am for my beloved. Read on. I am my beloved's, and his desire is toward me. Come, my beloved, let us go forth into the field. Let us lodge in the villages. Let us get up early to the vineyards. Let us see whether the vine is budded and the blossom is open and the pomegranates are in flower. There will I give thee my love. The mandrakes give forth fragrance, and at our doors are all manners of precious fruits, new and old, which I have laid up for thee, O my beloved. She's made her decision. And then she makes this statement. Remember, she's still down in the palace. She says, oh, that you were like my brother, that sucked the breast of my mother. When I would find thee without, I would kiss thee. Yea, and none would despise me. I would lead thee and bring thee into my mother's house. I would cause thee to drink of spiced wine and of the juice of the pomegranate. His left hand should be under my head, and his right hand should embrace me. He said, I belong to you, and I plan to be yours. And then she turns in verse 4 and says to the women of the court again, but note she abbreviates it. She says, I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem. She used to say, by the hinds and the rows of the field. She doesn't say that this time. She comes straight to the point. She says, I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, that you stir not up nor awake my love until it please. Leave me alone. Quit trying to tell me that. I've made my decision. I belong to the shepherd boy. Now look at verse 5. Who is this that cometh up from the wilderness, leaning on her beloved? Have you heard that line before? Who is this coming? Remember the transition that we made from Issachar to Jerusalem? The men standing and saying, who is this coming up? It's the litter of Solomon. And they describe all that, and it tells us that we've moved locations. Guess what? We've moved locations again. And where are we? We're back in Issachar at the home of the shepherd boy. And listen to what it says. Who is this that cometh up from the wilderness, leaning upon her beloved? Guess what? We messed around and missed the wedding. They've already gotten married. And they're coming back, maybe from a honeymoon, but they're coming into the village. And here's this lovely young couple, deeply in love. She's leaning on his arm, and they're coming in. And somebody in the crowd is saying, who is this coming in from the wilderness, leaning on her beloved? And the shepherd boy speaks up. This is the first time we've heard him in person. The shepherd boy speaks up and says, Under the apple tree I awakened thee. There thy mother was in travail with thee. There was she in travail that brought thee forth. And the girl says to him, set me as a seal upon thy heart, as a seal upon thine arm. For love is as strong as death, jealousy as cruel as Sheol. The flashes thereof are flashes of fire, a very flame of Jehovah. Love is powerful. Many waters cannot quench love, neither can floods drown it. If a man would give all his substance of his house for love, he would be utterly condemned, and that might be a reverse there. He would not be utterly condemned. And they have spoken their love to each other. And then there's somebody in the crowd. We're in the shepherd's village now. And just a crowd of these common people are standing around. And verse 8, somebody speaks up and says to them, we have a little sister, and she hath no breast. Meaning she's so young that she hasn't begun to develop physically. And they ask the question, what shall we do for our sister in the day when she shall be spoken for? They are seeing this beautiful young couple, and they say to her, we've got a young girl, we've got a young sister. How can we manage things so that she has the kind of love that you're demonstrating here? Somebody speaks up and says in verse 9, if she be a wall, they're talking about the little sister. If she be a wall, we will build upon her a turret of silver. If she be a door, we will enclose her with boards of cedar. If she be a wall resists. If she's a girl that doesn't let everybody have her, if she's a girl who resists, if she's pure, we will adorn her with silver. If she's a door, what's a door do? A door lets everybody in and out. If she's open, well, she's still our sister, but we'll enclose her with boards of cedar. That was the common stuff. Bespeaking the value of her purity. Then the shepherd girl speaks up and says, verse 10, I am a wall, and my breasts like the towers thereof. Then was I in his eyes as one that found peace. And then here's the observation. Solomon had a vineyard at Baal-Hamon. He let out the vineyard unto keepers. Every one for the fruit thereof was to bring 1,000 pieces of silver. My vineyard, which is mine, is before me. Thou, O Solomon, shall have the 1,000, and those that keep the fruit thereof, the 200. Evidently, Solomon had told her, you marry me and I'll give you that vineyard. And that vineyard produced enough that it paid 200 pieces of silver every year for the men that worked it, and gave 1,000 pieces of silver to the owner. She would be the owner. She said, Solomon, you can keep it. My vineyard is right here. My shepherd boy. And then the author closes for us. Make haste, my beloved, and be thou like unto a roe or a young hart upon the mountain of spices. And we close the curtain. And the shepherd boy and the shepherd girl are married, and she's made her choice. I believe that God put this in the book. Not just a collection of love stories by Solomon, but a lesson about choosing a mate in marriage. I preach on this. I preached it in a number of places all over the country. Preached it here many years ago. When I preach it, I make this application from it. That God is giving us suggestions for choosing a mate in marriage. I said a lot of times you see a list. Here are 14 things to look for in the ideal mate. That's too many to look for. I just give you 2. First, pick somebody you can respect. And pick somebody who thrills you, rings your bell. The chemistry's right. What are some of the factors in this story that indicate pick somebody you can respect? What do you learn from this story? Pick somebody who is godly. This boy and this girl loved each other, embraced and all that, but they were pure. She was pure and maintained her purity. She was a wall. When I make the application, I say, I'm not just talking about choose somebody who has been baptized in a Church of Christ. Pick somebody who is godly, who really cares for the Lord and behaves that way. Second, pick somebody who's industrious. Where was the boy? She knew where he was. He was in the field taking care of the sheep. What was she doing? She was on her way to get the fruit trees or to see about the fruit trees. When you're picking a husband, you're picking somebody that you're going to be dependent on for your livelihood and for your children's livelihood. Don't pick the old boy that brags about the fact that he had a job down at the factory, but he sneaked over in the back room, slept all day, and still got paid for it. You pick the guy who's the honest worker. And when you pick that girl, you go over to her house, and she's sitting over in the corner with her hands folded, and Mama's doing all the work. Might better wake up. But if she's industrious and productive herself and shows responsibility, good. Third thing I say, pick somebody who is courteous. Remember, he was kind of timid, came and looked at the door and looked at all of that. And then he paid respects to her. She was on a pedestal for him, and he was for her. Pick somebody who has that kind of magnetism to you. And then I would add one more. Pick somebody with a sense of humor. I don't mean necessarily joke-telling all the time, but this couple saw the beauties of nature. They saw the fun of the world. They enjoyed life. Pick somebody who's not an old grouch, but who enjoys things of this world. And finally, you pick somebody that rings your bell. You know, not everybody you respect has the chemistry that turns you on. And not everybody that turns you on is somebody you can respect. Put both of those together. I preached this years ago up in Richmond, Virginia. And afterwards, a middle-aged couple, I think he was one of the deacons, came out, and they were standing in the back talking to me and telling me they appreciated and everything. He said, one time I felt that I had that tingle, and then he said, I just realized my legs had gone to sleep. But let me make another point. How many times have you heard somebody say, well, children ought to be off by themselves in a room just playing all during worship service because they're not old enough to appreciate things and going on? I preached this sermon years ago in Huntsville, Alabama. Marshall, Steve's uncle, was the preacher there. There was a 7-year-old boy sitting on the second row. And by the way, when I preach this, I go 2 hours straight. And he had sat there during that 2 hours. And that included the songs and the prayer and all of that. But we stayed 2 hours. He had a notepad with him. An old lined pad like the kids use in elementary school. His parents brought me this later. I made a copy of it and gave the original back to the parents. 7 years old. He drew this cartoon story. See the different parts in it, like you see in the funny papers on Sunday, like that. Now I'm going to take it step by step. First one. We're going to take you to the king. And there the shepherd guys and all, or the people of the court, and taking the girl to see the king. Next block. And the king is saying to her, you'll be rich. And she's saying, but I love a shepherd boy. Next block. The king says, I'll give you gold if you marry me. And she's saying, but I love somebody else. 7 years old, remember? And the king is saying, please. And she's saying, no. And the king says, I like you because you're pretty. 7-year-old got the point. He got the point. 7-year-old says, I like you because you're pretty. And the girl says, I'll give my love to the shepherd boy. And she's got a picture of a door there. And here she is with the shepherd boy and the girl coming together. And they're married, and he summed it all at the bottom by saying, yeah, all right. 7 years old. Don't tell me that kids don't get anything out of what's going on when an adult is preaching. I've got time to tell you this. I'd gone to Ethiopia several times. Little Renee Anderson, not big Renee, but little Renee, was 6 years old. She went to her mother and said, I want to do something for the children in Ethiopia. The parents had not said anything to her to prompt that. She had just heard the announcements at church about, Brother Owen's been to Ethiopia and you know, that kind of thing. And she'd seen pictures of the kids over there. She said, I want to do something for the children in Ethiopia. So her mother let Renee and her little brother, who was just 3 at the time, make little cards and write their names on it and things like, I love you. And they put their hands on the card and drew around the fingers and, you know, or drew little hearts on it and made a whole stack of cards out of construction paper. And we took those to Ethiopia. and I handed them out. Steve did a video as we were handing them out at one place, and we've got the video of it. Little children in Ethiopia had sat on the ground for more than 2 hours while we preached. And they behaved. They didn't get up and run out. They behaved. I'm talking about little children. Toddlers. Steve? One. That's right. Out of about 30 kids, one started moving around. He's a little boy that couldn't have been 2 years old. He got to moving around, and one of the adults came and kind of tapped him, and he sat down, and that took care of that. I'm going to tell you, children absorb what's going on. They may be coloring or something like that, or looking at a book, but they're hearing it all. Don't lose that opportunity. Oh, most of us got grandchildren. Well, tell them about it. All right. I loved this thing that little boy did that I think just captured the story and shows you what a child can do. Any of you have any questions or any comments? We've just got 2 or 3 minutes. Our time's up. I didn't think we'd get through, but we did. Did you like the story? I firmly believe that that's why it's in the book. I'll say again, I just cannot believe that God chose to include in the Bible a bunch of love letters that Solomon wrote to his 61st wife. If you take that, in effect, it would be God sanctioning his polygamous marriages. And they're the very things that took him down. And if you say that, what real value would that be for us today, except that on Valentine's Day you ought to pick out a good card? Other than that, there would be no merit in it. But if the interpretation that I've shared with you is valid, it is God's guidance and help in selecting a mate when you get married. Thank you for listening so kindly.